Hello, this is Uncle Jimmy again with Jimmy's Train Station and Travel Adventures, and we're on another adventure today here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And me and my son Forbes are going to be taking the bus tour, the battlefield bus tour, which I've never done. I've lived here for 12 years now, and I've never taken the bus tour. So this is my son Forbes. Say hello, Forbes.
Hi.
And we're at the Gettysburg Visitor Center right now, and our bus leaves here in an hour, so we're waiting to get on our bus and take the battlefield tour. So join me and my son as we do this adventure and sit back and enjoy the battlefield. Well folks, we are at the bus stop here at parking lot 2, and it's 12:07, and our bus don't depart till 1 o'clock. It's a 2-hour tour. We bought our tickets here in the visitor center. I think it was like $31 for an adult and $21 for a youth, so it was like $52 altogether for the 2 tickets, which takes you around the battlefield for 2 hours. And they do make a couple stops along the way. Now I'm not going to film all of the bus tour, but I will film some of it. This is one of the buses coming in now, but ours don't take off till 1 o'clock. So sit back and enjoy the video. I hope you enjoy the battlefield tour.
Private. How do you notify the next of kin? How do you bury them? Where do you bury them? So by 1863, they're burying the dead on the battlefield where they died, both armies. So in this case, best guess is that there are about 7,000 killed in the battle. Another 2,000 or 3,000 are going to die of wounds within a week or so. So it's pretty safe to say there were about 10,000 of these temporary, poorly dug graves. I'm using the term loosely when I say buried on the battlefield. A more accurate term would be covered on the battlefield, because that's basically what they did. They covered the bodies. The little bit of dirt that covered the bodies washed away pretty quickly, and then you had visible bodies and possibilities of disease and a lot of other things. So the Union states set out to kind of help that problem. And what the Union states did, they bought 17 acres of available land on the hill where the town cemetery had been. So the Wright Cemetery is the cemetery that was here during the battle. The cemetery behind the fence, the stone fence, stone wall, is the cemetery that was created after the battle. Now the white stones you just saw are not Civil War. They're veterans, but not Civil War veterans. What happened was, when they finished reburying the Union dead of the battle, they had a lot of extra space, so it becomes a national cemetery. The Civil War section, and you have an opening in the trees here to the right. If you look through to the right, up where that white pickup truck is parked, that's the Civil War section. Each Union state that participated in the battle has their own section. So when you go up there, men from Pennsylvania buried together, men from New York buried together. This is the way they designed the cemetery. 3,500 reburials from the battlefield, and that's the cemetery that President Lincoln came to dedicate when he delivered the little speech that's become so famous. We're no longer in the national park. We're in the town. Now, the town has a history of its own, and it preserves its history maybe a bit differently than the national park does, but it still has preserved it nicely. One of the things they realized some years ago is that they needed to do more, because people in the battlefield, they needed to draw them into the town, and then they would patronize businesses. So they emphasized the history a little more. Give you a little idea of what I'm talking about. Look down here on the left. The first red vehicle that you see parked, right behind behind it is a gray brick house. This was a tavern at the time of the battle. And look at the walls. The walls, they are bullet marks. All those little chips and marks and nicks right here. Now, there's a great photo of that.
You can make a left here and it's going to cross.
One of the great photos of that house after the battle, that end wall, it shows about a 3-foot diameter hole blown in the end of that wall by an artillery piece. So that wall has been repaired. And on the houses, we're making a little route change here because of the construction, but there are little plaques, bronze plaques, rectangular, that tell you which buildings were Civil War buildings, which buildings are not. So they've also marked that way, and unfortunately not many over in this area, but there are a lot on the street that we just left. This is the type of terrain where most of the battle is going to be fought. Now, if you look left and right, in order to recreate the battlefield, out of the 6,000 acres, the National Park leases 2,200 acres to local farmers who come in and plow and plant and harvest and use the battlefield for crops. They cut hay, they grow wheat, milo, soybeans, corn, and along this ridge, and I'll talk more about these in a minute, these are regimental monuments. A regiment in the Civil War was 1,000 men when it started. By the time it got to this battlefield, there may be 300 or 400 or 500 men. So the monuments show you where the men were. The cannons show you where cannons were during the battle. Different states. We passed Pennsylvania, New York. Here's another Pennsylvania regiment. Generals commanded the battlefield. We have statues of generals standing, like this one. That's Major General Abner Doubleday. We have cavalry monuments, like the one on the right. So when you see the monuments, they are telling you where the men were when they... They are telling you where the men were when they participated in this battle.
Let's go up past the second floor.
Now, 15, 20 years ago, if we were looking out over this same part of the battlefield, it looked like a golf course. They mowed everything. They just mowed. Then they kind of figured out, well, that's not what it looked like. Let's go back and start to recreate what the battlefield was like when they fought here. So now you see the fields. You see the fences. All the fences you see are relatively recent. And they're where fences were during the battle. But they're not old fences. They're part of this restoration. So farms, within the 6,000 acres, they maintain 39 Civil privately owned. Now, when you're looking that way, I've had a lot of days when I've had to tell people, just trust me, there are some mountains out there someplace. It's been a little hazy to see them on some days. The reason those mountains are important, the battle here during that 3-day period in July, the only reason that battle is fought is Robert E. Lee decides to launch an invasion. He's invading the North. He's bringing the North war in their own backyard. That's what he wants to do. Get away from Virginia, move up here, allow Virginia to recover a little bit, bring the war north. So his invasion route is behind that mountain range from Virginia to Pennsylvania and the town of Chambersburg. Once he got to Chambersburg, he turns that army west to east. Now, there was no opponent for him. The Union Army had not arrived yet. So what does he do? He takes advantage of this. He knew from experience that Pennsylvania was rich farmland. And he decides to take advantage and sends about a third of his army east and northeast over Pennsylvania 30, 40 miles or more, gathering anything that would help his army. Clothing, food, hay, grain, anything. So Lee's army is somewhat scattered. Just kind of keep that in mind because that'll come back in the picture in a few minutes here. Now, the first Union soldiers don't arrive in the town until June 30th. And riding into the town from the south, out of Maryland, is a division of cavalry under the command of John Buford. Buford was a young general. He was well thought of. And as he rode into the town, he sees the high ground east of here. Very visible. Came up the Emmitsburg Road. He decides, I'm defending the town, but I'm defending the town west of the town. So his thinking is, I don't have that many men. I can't defeat the Confederate army that's moving in this direction, but I can delay them. I can slow them down a little bit. If I can slow them down enough, it gives my army, the Union Army, the infantry, a chance to get here. And that's what he tries to do. So when you hear about this battle starting, if you look toward the mountains, the last line of trees that you can see is one of those ridges. That's known as Hur's Ridge. And that's where Buford dismounts his cavalry early on the morning of July 1st. As the Confederates advance from the area near the mountains, shots are fired, battle on starts out there. The first 2 or 3 hours, it pushes this way because Buford just doesn't have enough men. So as Buford's men are falling back by mid-morning, the Union Army starts to arrive. General John Reynolds rode out ahead, rode into the town, found Buford in the seminary, talked to him about what Buford was trying to do, and then Reynolds agreed with Buford's defense and brought up reinforcements. So the monuments you see marked along this ridge, the regiments, are a combination of reinforcements that are arriving by mid-morning and Buford's cavalry that have fallen back. That's why you have a mix of infantry and cavalry monuments on this. So this is the second line of defense. This is when the fighting starts to get far more serious. It's 10 or 10:30 in the morning, and the edge of the wooded area behind us, we pass it. There's a monument there. Reynolds is killed early in the battle, which was a huge loss to the Union Army. But the fight continues along this ridge, and we're going to follow it north, and about 5 minutes we'll be getting out of the bus. So if you have questions, why, try to answer them then. Here's a good example of the fence that I'm talking about. This is a unique fence. It was a tradition traditional fence that was built. This is primarily settled by German, Scots, and Irish immigrants. So this is called Virginia worm fence. And it's a very sturdy fence. It's built without nails. So there are no nails. It's just the way the rails are stacked. Very sturdy. Again, farming on both sides of the road here. And the fences, the reason the Park Service knows where to place them is there was a map drawn in 1867 that was very well done. It showed every field, every fence, every crop, every type of fence, every orchard, and that's what the park uses to recreate. And I mentioned the orchards. Every farm had an orchard. And one of the reasons for the orchards is that drinking water became contaminated very easily. So in order to have something drinkable, they depended on beer and cider, home-brewed beer and cider. And the orchard provided the apples. Now, I know you're scratching your head saying, yeah, but I don't see a farm. No, you don't. It stood right here. There's a barn and a house right here to the right. The house was the last building that they demolished, and that was demolished in 1937. So I'm sure if they did a dig there, the archaeologists could find the outlines of the buildings, but I don't think that's going to happen. So there was a farm there, and that's why the orchard is there. And this is Oak Hill. And keep in mind, everything up here except the big monument is Confederate. The cannons, the tablets, the statues, the monuments, everything Confederate. Since there's no one occupying the best position here to see things, let's get out for a while and walk to the end of the sidewalk toward the barn, the house.
Okay, now I mentioned everything up here is Confederate. The reason is, as soon as it looked like the battle was shaping up, Lee began to get a feeling it wasn't going to be long before he was going to be in a large fight, and he didn't want to go into it without a third of his army. So he sent an order recalling the 2 divisions that had gone out gathering supplies. They took different routes to get back to the battlefield, and one of them came down along that wooded ridge out on this hill. Rhodes Division, 6,000 to 8,000 Confederate soldiers and 16 cannons. That's the critical information. Because this hill is open like it is today. This was an open hill. That was a thicket. That was wooded. So it looks just about like it did at the time of the battle. Now when you look at cannons on the battlefield, you've got 2 types. You've got the cannons, and we'll see a lot more later on. There are not many up here, but there will be a lot when we get to other parts of the battlefield. The green barreled cannons have kind of a green patina on them. They are bronze smoothbore cannons. They fired the traditional cannonball. So if you're familiar with track and field, it looks a lot like the shot put. Weigh 12 pounds. The newer technology, the black barrel cannons and the muskets that the men are carrying, the barrels are rifled. So this is the first war where rifling was a real factor. Those rifled barrels, the grooves that would spin the bullet or spin the artillery shell, increased the range and the accuracy. Now, as far as the cannons, they had a choice of different types of ammunition, but the ammunition used most often on this battlefield is a long distance shell that exploded. It was like a bomb. And when you loaded it, if we're talking, let's say, a cannonball, it was hollow. There was a hole that led into gunpowder that was inside that hollow ball. You inserted a fuse that was cut to a length of 2 seconds or 3 seconds or 4 seconds, however long you wanted it to burn. And when you fired the cannon, that fuse would burn until that cannonball got over the enemy, and then it would explode in the air into shrapnel. Rifled cannons had the same thing, but their ammunition looks just about like that bottle of water. If we cut the neck off, it looks like a big iron bullet. So cannonballs and rifle ammunition look a bit different. Now, here's the reason this hill is important. The green barrel cannons, and you can see one peeking out of the grass. The higher the grass gets, the less you can see the cannon, but there's one there. The green barrel cannons had a range of about a mile. That's roughly from here to that stone end barn. Black barrel cannons on a hill with this elevation are going to fire 2 miles or more. So immediately you can see they could do a lot of damage at a long range, and they did. And the Union Army had to pull back a bit out of range. What dooms the Union Army on the first day? The big flat roof brick building is the college field house. That's Gettysburg College. Above it, that dark tree line where you can see some evergreen trees, that's Cemetery Hill. Back on Cemetery Hill arrives another part of the Union Army. And things were a little confusing that first day, and they weren't given orders necessarily where to position their men. So the general in charge left a third of his men, we're talking 10 to 12,000 men, a third of them on Cemetery Hill, and he put the other 2/3 about a quarter mile beyond the Red Barn, right across that open field, stretching for nearly a half mile. Not a bad position, but here's what makes it a bad position. If you look off in that direction, there's a big radio cell phone tower sticking up. That's the old Harrisburg Road. Coming down the old Harrisburg Road is the other Confederate division that was gathering supplies. General Early's men, 16 more cannons. From that distant position, they opened fire this way. Cannons up here are firing this way, and those Union men are caught in that open field. They're there about an hour, and they decide to get out of there. And that's when the retreat starts. That's when the Union line starts to fall on the first day. When they retreat, that meant the rest of these men we've seen now surrounded on 3 sides by the enemy. So the retreat, if they're lucky, will carry those Union men to Cemetery Hill in some safety. If they're not lucky, they're killed or wounded or captured during the retreat, because the Confederates advance and attack the Union Army as it's retreating. That's why the Confederate Army ends up capturing the town. Now, the big monument. That has more to do with reunions than anything, the aftermath of the battle. Years past, the first big reunion that they had here was the 50th anniversary, 1913. They invited any living Civil War veteran. They ended up getting 54,000 veterans back here, 1913. So they got the idea of building a peace memorial, and this is the result of that. 25 years later, the North and South had cooperated to build this, and it's tough to see on a bright day, but there's a flame burning up in the top of it. You see it flicker every now and then, and they were ready to dedicate it in 1938 during the 75th reunion. And they invited any living Civil War veteran only 8,000 still alive at that time, and just over 1,800 came back. Their average age was 94.
Wow.
So that was the last big assembly that had any sizable number of veterans to it. And the monument stands very visible from a lot of different places on the battlefield. So it's one of the largest monuments we have here on Oak Hill. Questions?
This is now a very nice museum. So if you get a chance to visit that museum, why, it will be well worth it. And down here on the left where these cars are parked, this is the third building that was here. 2 houses and the dormitory. That made up the seminary. And now they've expanded greatly with other dormitories and buildings, so much larger campus. Not much going on here because the year has come to an end, so more activity in the fall when the year starts. Now, after the first day, when Lee drove the Union Army through the town, right here is where he begins to position his men. A third of the Confederate Army, General Ewell's men, are through the town on the street to the left. The other 2/3, A.P. Hill and James Longstreet, are down the ridge in front, and it looks like a reverse L. Now, I noticed, Nelson, are you going to buy this time? The for sale sign's up again. The last time this house sold, the asking price was $1.2 million. It's 14 rooms, it's been altered considerably. Additions built onto it. There's a little Civil War house in the middle that's been built around, but I'm not sure what the asking price is this time. It might be a little higher. Houses on the left are private property. Area on the right is National Park property. Here's where you get to see a lot of cannons. Green, bronze, smoothbore, firing cannonballs. Black-barreled rifle guns, several kinds, firing rifle ammunition. They're aimed at Cemetery Hill, and where is that? Well, right now the front of the bus should be able to see a big blue water tank. Way off to the left, that's on Cemetery Hill. So that's where the Union Army has retreated. They're regrouping. Lee's position extends all along this ridge. So everything down along this ridge is Confederate. Army of Northern Virginia. Here's where you can see a little more about the Union position. So if you look immediately to the left, that wooded area is Cemetery Hill behind the houses. Then to the right of that is Cemetery Ridge. And then far in front left, that's Little and Big Round Tops. If you've heard about the Round Tops, that's the Round Top position. And these cannons are part of that artillery line that I talked about. Prior to Pickett's charge, they bombarded the Union position for nearly 2 hours. This is the field that Pickett's charge crossed. So this is that mile of open ground. The Confederate states have put state monuments here. So the first state monument you see is North Carolina's. Look to the left. It's a statue of a group of soldiers. And the sculptor of those men is the same man that carved the president in Mount Rushmore. So you've probably seen Rushmore more times, but it's the same sculptor. He started Rushmore in 1927. Then he did this in 1929. And then he went back and he worked on Rushmore until he died in 1941. and his son took up the Rushmore project. Now, the largest Confederate monument is coming up in front. And when we talked about Pickett's charge, this monument is right smack dead center in looking across the field where that attack took place. So this is General Robert E. Lee, the Virginia State Memorial, and he's looking across the field in the direction of that attack. So you can kind of get an idea maybe why this attack wasn't successful. When you're crossing a field that you can be killed any step by a Union cannon, your chances of making a successful attack are not very good. So this is that mile of open ground. We'll see it from two sides here. This, one of the earliest, it's the earliest Confederate, one of the earlier statues here, dates back, celebrated its anniversary, 100 years, 1917 to 2017. Good likeness of General Lee and Traveler, his horse. Now I saw in some park information that they're doing a restoration of this summer, but I'm not quite sure what they have in mind. It's been restored pretty nicely. Maybe they're doing stonework or something else, but it's on the calendar to have some restoration work done. Now being seen to get into position to attack what they thought was the Union position on the high ground of the Round Tops. Well, like a lot of other information, it wasn't as the Confederate forces thought it was. So when we get up in this little bit of high ground, we will be on Longstreet's position. So he has stretched his men along this ridge. They're in line waiting. And by late afternoon, this attack is going to begin. Roughly about 3:30, 4 o'clock. The objective is the high ground of the Round Tops, the two hills. And look to the right here, there's a little bit of fence, but look in the trees. This is the statue of General Longstreet. Longstreet's different. That's a much newer statue. And the sculptor wanted it to be visitor friendly. He wanted it to be accessible. So people can stand and they can touch it and they can photograph it. So it's much different than one like General Lee or General Meade or one of the other ones. So there are the Round Tops. Notice the difference. The right hill is much higher but completely wooded. Not much use to the military. Little Round Top, on the other hand, had been cleared about a year before by the man that owned it. So it made a much better, more desirable military position. Now I know not much good came out of COVID, if any. We had one bit of good, ray of hope here. You look off to the front left, that nice little Civil War stone farmhouse, prior to COVID, was a 2.5-story frame house, white frame wood house, with a 3-car garage and a sunroom. And the park owned it, and during COVID they got underway and did the restoration, got rid of everything that was supposed to go, and that's what we have. We love it because it's a Civil War house. It was inside the other one. And it's important because it's the James Warfield house. James Warfield was the local blacksmith. Now my young people on the bus, keep in mind, farming is the prime way of making something related to your farming, you couldn't go to Home Depot or Lowe's or the hardware store. You went to the blacksmith. They made nails, they made plows, they made tools, they sharpened tools, they repaired wagon rims, the iron rims on wagons. So the blacksmith was an extremely, extremely important person. And that was the home of the blacksmith. The shop stood right behind it. And I don't know if they have any plans for excavating and finding the blacksmith shop or not. But the house did a nice job. Now you see the roundtops more clearly. The wooded, high, right hill, big round top. Not much happens there. The smaller hill, as you're going to see here in a minute, is wide open. There's a monument up on top of that hill that looks like a castle. That's the hill that is pretty critical, and we're going to try to get out of there. So when we get out on a little round top and you look across in this direction, you're going to see this farmhouse. This is a Civil War house. They even have the outhouse there. So you'll see that from the top of the hill. Another one, because this is why this day did not turn out well for at least part of the Union Army. We've got a Corps commander in the Union Army here by the name of Daniel Sickles. He commands the 3rd Corps, 2 divisions, and he's most famous here for 2 things. I'll tell you one now. The most famous, one of the things, is disobeying his order. His order was to place men on the high ground back at the round tops. He disobeys it and moves out here 3/4 of a mile where in front of where he should have been, and that's what leads to the fighting in the peach orchard. So this is the peach orchard. Sickles occupies up along the road through the peach orchard. These are Sickles cannons. Longstreet has a great angle on attacking this position. And Longstreet's attack is going to bloody Sickles badly and drive him out of here. So he loses the position and shouldn't have been out here if he followed his order anyway. Now let me show you one thing here. If you're not familiar with this, it's very common in Pennsylvania, especially Pennsylvania Germans, that they would put in a brick house, a brick barn, a stone barn, or a stone house. When they build it, they put a date stone. That date stone looks a lot like a tombstone. And it gives the builder, the year it was built, all the information. Look across the field to the left. There's a brick barn. Look in the peak of the brick part. There's the date stone. Then the diamonds are ventilation. And right under the 2 diamond shapes is a cannonball hole. So right above that roof. So that's battle damage. Now, peach orchard, Sickles. He has his men in 2 other places, the wheat field and Devil's Den. And the wheat field, which is coming up to the right, is not wheat today, so don't expect to see wheat. It was wheat at the time of the battle. Foot for foot, this 27-acre wheat field on the right is the bloodiest fighting on the battlefield. You've got a 27-acre wheat field. They fought back and forth over that wheat field on the second day 6 times. Taken, retaken, back, forth. In 2.5 hours, this wheat field on the right will see 6,000 dead and wounded men in 2.5 hours. In 27 acres. So basically, what you see is what you get. There's not much more to it than what see. So it was the worst, bloodiest of all the fighting in a small area. Foot for foot, that's as bad as it gets. Little round top coming up, the cleared hill. You can see why it would be a good military position with visibility, position for your cannons. The enemy's got to climb up the hill. You got boulders for your defenses. Now, let me show you how you just can't mess with Mother Nature. You can't defeat Mother Nature. This little stream right here, normally this time of the year has about 3 feet of water in it, called Plum Run. Well, that's not the way it is now, because about a year or two ago the beavers moved in, and they dammed it, and now it's Plum Lake. If you've never seen a beaver lodge, look right here to the left. Here's the beaver lodge, that pile of dirt right in that little cluster of trees. You can see where they've gnawed the trees. We now have a lake. We've got ducks. We've got geese. It's completely changed the whole ecosystem here. This was a bone-dry little valley with one little teeny stream, and now it's much different. Now, here's one of the concerns. Number one, the beavers moved in naturally. So the park considers them native animals, and they can't just go in and trap them and move them. And number two, here's the problem even bigger. If you look down here to the left, there's a New York monument to a New York regiment right here to the left. A very famous one. The base of it is now underwater. Right there. So they're concerned about the damage to the base. This is Devil's Den. Devil's Den is closed right now to people. You can drive through it, but you can't get out and walk around. They're restoring it. Now, Longstreet's attack has swept around Devil's Den, coming through the trees from right to left. Texas men, Alabama men, headed toward the hill. The hill is where Sickles was supposed to be. And of course, he's way out in front, no one up here. Fortunately for the Union Army, there's another Union general rode up. When he got to the hill, he recognized it needed men, sent an order to get Union men up there, and a small number, 4 regiments, one from Michigan. The castle is in New York. Next to them, Pennsylvanians. And next to them, if you've heard about Colonel Chamberlain and the 20th Maine and the bayonet charge and all of the famous things his regiment did, he's on the extreme left, and the Texas, Alabama men are attacking. So here's the fight for Little Round Top. Now, Colonel Chamberlain, 20th Maine, is right out the windshield, up on this little rocky hillside. Right there is where the bayonet charge takes place. It's now on your right as we go up the hill. And as you go up, you're going to notice some things up here a little different. Notice there have been trees cut. Talk about that in a minute.
Absolutely.
So farmers who owned this land Were they compensated? I mean, obviously the whole wheat crop was destroyed for the year. Like, what happens there?
Well, not much. One of the great things that you're able to do is go back and search those claims for compensation. And guess what? You had to prove who did the damage. So the standard answer was, well, it wasn't the Union Army, it was the Confederate Army. Get the money from them. So if they were compensated, it was mere pennies on the dollar. But it wasn't too long after that where they found it pretty profitable to sell the land when they started to preserve it. So they did end up not losing a lot, probably making more than the land was. But compensation, you read these: 6 pigs, 2 cows, 4 horses, 80 bushels of wheat, bushels of corn, hay. So they itemize everything, but they did not get compensated for it. They found a way around it, which probably the same thing that would happen today, I guess. This is the guy that saved the hill. This is General Warren. He rode up here, he found the hill deserted. He sent an order that brought up 4 regiments initially, and then a 5th one joined them. Way down there on the side of the hill, you can see the Michigan regiment, the Castle at the far end, New Yorkers, Pennsylvanians, Maine, and another New York regiment joined pretty quickly. Their advantage of being on top of the hill kept the Confederates from taking this high ground position. Now, sun is cooperating. If you pass the vision test, you don't have to see your eye doctor for another year. Take a look in that direction. There's a red barn with 3 white cupolas. Lots of louvers and doors. Look above the right corner. There's a white church steeple. That's the chapel at the seminary. Not the cupola, that's the church chapel. Put your finger on the steeple and trace that dark ridge to the right until you see a little white spot. Near the crest of that next ridge, there's a little white dot looking thing. That's the peace light. We're now 5 miles south of that. So you're about as far south. That's first day. That's about as far north as the fighting went. We're nearly as far south. So the end result is Sickles, who was in Devil's Den, Wheatfield, Peach Orchard, loses all of that. If you look at a map of the 3rd day, that's all Confederate. This hill held. This remains in Union hands. Sickles loses 30% of his men. He's driven out. But the Confederate attack cannot take this high ground position. So this is a key that remains in Union hands. Questions? And if you don't remember, there's the house and the outhouse. Right across, off in the distance.
So where was the peach orchard from here?
Okay, you cannot, I can get you close because the trees are tall enough, but see that red ball?
Is Pennsylvania's state monument. And Pennsylvania did a really, really nice thing. When they put this monument here in 1910, they decided to honor every man from Pennsylvania that fought in this battle. So each tablet around the bottom of the monument is 1 regiment of Pennsylvanians. So they're all around the base, they're inside. 300, 400, 500 names on each tablet. 6 generals, 2 political figures. Facing the road, you have President Lincoln on the left with his arm extended. Governor Curtin, who was governor of Pennsylvania, to the right. 34,000 names on this monument. over and then take a pencil and rub over top of it. Now, when everybody's carrying some type of camera, they just photograph and they don't have to trace. But a lot of genealogy done there. Civil War ancestors. Getting to the Pickett's Charge area. Now remember, day 3, we talked about this already with the amount of smoke, and we put it into perspective. The cannonade that Lee planned to try to destroy the opposition on this ridge lasted, according to some people, as long as 2 hours. Some say it wasn't that long, but it was a lot of artillery fire. The problem for the Confederate artillerists was that they were overshooting the Union Ridge. So instead of hitting the Union Army, they were shooting over in a lot of respects. So when you get up here to the right, there's a red barn that's in view. That's about where these shells were landing, rather than on the ridge where you see the defenses. So you've got 2 lines of defense. You've got a front line, you've got reserves, you've got a lot of artillery, and as it turns out, when this attack takes place, it's going to turn out to be somewhat of a disaster for Robert E. Lee because of the losses that he has in this attack. It eventually is what will make him understand he's got to retreat out of here.
Well, folks, that ends our blog. Hope you enjoyed that. It's pretty interesting. Of course, I knew most of the battle living here, but if you're watching this, please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up. Feel free to leave comments and suggestions of other things you'd like to see. Meantime, go out and have your own adventures and enjoy life. I'm planning on making a few videos myself, more in depth about the battle in the future here. I'm going to divide it into 3 days: the first day's battle, second day's battle, and third day's battle of Gettysburg, and show you a little more in-depth stuff about it, because there's so much to show and talk about. But I hope you enjoyed that. That's the first time I took the bus tour. It was worth it. It's a 2-hour tour. We enjoyed it.
First time for me too.
First time for my son. He learned a lot. So till next time, this is Uncle Jimmy, Jimmy's Train Station and Travel Adventures, and I hope you enjoyed me and my son's adventure today. Till next time, goodbye.